You will move ahead of us and follow my directions.
Hello everybody, my name is the Pandorica Opens and welcome back to the history of the Daleks. In today's review we are looking at the history of the Daleks set 1, which is based on the Daleks from the very first Dalek story, The Dead Planet. Now, these figures are the very first sets that were released in B&M in the History of the Daleks set, hence why it's called History of the Daleks 1, and is essentially a re-release of the original Dead Planet Dalek that we saw way back in the original release, the Dalek Collector's Box Set number 1. And I really like these Daleks, and unlike the original release there are some changes to the actual figures in the paint apps and stuff, and I'm going to go through those now and take a look at them. But first, let's do what we always do. Let's check out the articulation. Now, it has the standard Dalek articulation for both figures, so the head does a 360 as you'd expect. The eye stalk can move up and down. It is very stiff, the eye stalk, on both Daleks, so be very careful with it. The gun arm and the plunger are all on ball joints as you'd expect. And of course the Dalek is on 3 wheels. So basically your basic articulation that we've seen on every Dalek figure since Character Options started making them. Essentially, in terms of the detail, these two Daleks are exactly the same as the original release of the Dead Planet Dalek, except the paint apps have been updated and certain things have been changed, which have made these figures a lot better. Now, the first thing I will say is that the silver on these Daleks is a lot brighter than in the original release, which I really like, because in the original release, which I actually have to hand, as you can see here, I'll just plonk him next to them, he's very pale. As you can see, the silver is not as vibrant and bright, and then when you get to these, it's very silver, and I really like it. So the silver on these Daleks looks really nice, and I really like it. And it's not just on the heads and the skirt; it's on the neck bin, the guns, the ball joints, the shoulder pads, everything. And I think that this just enhances the figures quite a lot, and I really like the look of them. The dome lights on the original, as you can see here, were transparent Mini Cooper lights, which is what they were in the show. And the new release essentially has the same, except now that they have got a more clouded effect to them, so that they're not quite as transparent, which I think works really nicely. A lot better than just being transparent, so that's a really nice attention to detail. The only other major difference really with these Daleks, other than that, is the etheric beam locators are a slightly different shade of blue, which I'm going to take a look at this one just for a moment. It's a slightly different shade of blue, which looks really nice, particularly in this light and in hand. It's still the turquoisey blue, but they've just changed the shade. I have heard stories about people who have had trouble with the spheres. Like, I've got a bit of paint rub on mine, but that's something I can live with. It's something you'd expect, and these Daleks were always a bit battered because they're from the 60s. But the paint job is really nice. I really like it, but some people have had issues where they've had to the bits have been painted over and the tone of the blue is 2 different shades. Luckily, I've got away with that on both of my Daleks. In terms of the details, as I said, exactly the same. The head dome, very nice and smooth, plain silver like we'd expect. You have the 60s eye stalk with the 10 discs on at the end, and then the ball of the eye there, and then the flat rounded section right at the end, which ends in the pupil of the eye stalk. Now, what I really like about these two Daleks, if I just bring in the other, as you can see, they have got 2 distinct paint jobs on the eye stalks. This one here is the standard eye stalk colour, where it's just completely white like we'd expect, and this one has a more of a dot pupil in the eye, which is because the Daleks in the 60s had lenses fitted in their eyes rather than the pupil that we get in the 70s, 80s and beyond. And I think that's awesome. I really like that they've given these 2 eye stalks a different look, because it does mean that these Daleks have a bit more character to them, and there is something very menacing about just having the dot of the eye as opposed to the big wide eye over there. So that's really nice that they've done that, and it also does differentiate them from the original, which also had a completely white pupil in the eye. Other than that, your shoulder section, as you can see, is the same. You have the silver that I mentioned earlier, the really bright silver going across the shoulder sections, the gun, the plunger arm, and the ball joints, and of course the grey of the midsection is the grey that we've come to know and love. In fact, hang on, actually might be a bit, it's actually a bit darker than the originals, which actually works a bit better. So that we've got the grey of the middle section being a tone darker, I believe, on both Daleks, which I really, really like. And then other than that, the skirt is the same until you reach the fender, which has now got scuff marks at the bottom. That's just done with a little bit of paint, which looks really, really nice. I really, really like that, because that's what would happen with these Dalek props as they move around the studio, is they would get beaten up and battered as they travel across the floor. And then a final little Easter egg, which I really, really like, and it's the last detail really on these figures that's different, is if I turn them around, ta-da, they have the identifying marks on their backs. Now, these marks, as you can see, are just black lines, and these indicate which Daleks were which, because when they filmed the episode, the Daleks, in order to tell the Dalek operators where to move and which Dalek to move, they would say, right, Dalek 1, move to your left. And essentially, that mark is to indicate this is Dalek 1, and on the other, the two lines indicate that that is Dalek 2, and basically up in the director would say, okay, Dalek 1 move over here, Dalek 2 move over there, and that's how they would direct the Daleks. And I really, really like that, because on the original Dalek, you didn't have that, so that's really, really nice. And it just makes these Daleks a little bit different to their original counterpart. So, final thoughts on these figures. They're no longer available in B&M because they came out about a year or two ago now, but if you can track them down, definitely purchase them. I would suggest, if you want to start collecting the History of the Daleks set, that you have already started and that you try and track them down. These are really, really nice. I mean, these aren't my favourite Daleks. My favourite Daleks are the Imperials, but I am getting fond of the Silver Daleks, particularly in the later 60s era. And the paint job on these is really, really nice, especially when you compare it to the original. So I'm really, really glad that I bought these. And now I have a couple more Dalek action figures from the original Dalek story. And it's a good start to a range of Daleks, which no doubt, when it's done, is going to leave a lot of collectors who missed out on other figures very, very happy. So, thank you for watching this review, guys. I hope you enjoyed it. Make sure you go and check out the first episode where I reviewed the Golden Emperor, if you haven't seen it already. And join me next time when we will be looking at the History of the Daleks Set 2, based on Dalek Invasion of Earth.
Your legs are paralyzed. You will recover shortly, unless you force us to use our weapons again. In that case, the condition will be permanent.